Hello and welcome back to It's Not Just Black and White, where the topics that we discuss are most likely going to be controversial. So if you're easily offended or even very difficultly offended, this may not be the place for you. As always, my name is Ellie Lake and I'm sitting here with Jordan Brown and Corey Barraclough.
Hello, hello.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming together today. How are you?
Fantastic.
Amazing. So as we discussed, we're going to be taking on quite a heavy topic today. But before we set up or even tell you guys what the topic is, I'm going to go ahead and give you both a kind of a background or a set up story for what we're going to be discussing today. And I think it's incredibly relevant to the story.
Let's hear it.
So I watched this interview about a gentleman who wrote a book. The book is called Doublespeak, and the gentleman's name is William Lutz. Quite an intelligent guy. He's saying that doublespeak is a form of language that we have accepted and we formally use in our society. So he says that it's a language designed to evade responsibility and makes the unpleasant seem pleasant, which a language that pretends to communicate but really doesn't, and is designed to mislead while pretending not to, right?
Uh-huh.
He's saying that not only should we all be aware of this language so we can actually defend ourselves against certain policies or verbiage or how our politicians speak, he's saying that we should not even allow our leaders to use this language, because it can be incredibly corruptive in a society, is his point.
It's saying that this shouldn't be allowed in the society.
Yeah,
what the book was saying. Exactly,
because he gives the example of sugar-free, right? We won't get into corporations are bad, but he gives the example of sugar-free, right? So somebody calls him and says, hey, so how can these guys use sugar-free on the packaging? Does that mean there's still sugars in it, right? Yeah, because sugar-free, when it comes to marketing, sugar-free just means that they've not added any table sugar or this household organic sugars, whatever it is that you're using. They're just not putting that, but fructose, which is America's favorite artificial sweetener, we're using it. We're using it a lot. It's corn-based. All that thing is corn. So, corn is really where our money is produced agriculturally. And the example I'll give you is like Mexican Coke versus American Coke.
Yeah.
So that same guy asked William Lutz, so these products still have sugars? The guy said yes. So he said what he should be using is something called a dietetic, which is governed by law. And I don't know if that still exists today because the FDA last year really lowered their standards on a lot of quality. But basically that same guy who went to him is saying, I'm a diabetic. I can only eat the sugar-free or this stuff, but still those sugars are really not good for him in that way.
Yeah.
And that's where this doublespeak gets lost. Now he references the book 1984, right? In the book addresses it's by George Orwell. It addresses the importance of language in a society. So the control and manipulation of society, or to control and direct society, the role that language plays in that. But he says that the most important aspect of that is that power grows not out of a barrel of a gun, right? Not ruled by terror. Not by the thought police. And this is like an interview from the 80s. He references the thought police. That's the cancel culture today. It's funny. But it grows out of the power of language and knowledge. And then he goes on to say reality, right? He's getting kind of metaphysical with it. Reality is not an external thing. It exists not in the mind of the individual, which soon perishes, right? Because when you die, your belief system more or less is going to die with you unless you're part of a collective. And then he references political parties, unless you're part of a party, and he calls it the party. But in the mind of the party, he said and that never dies, right? That belief or that idea never dies because it's a collective, and that collective is immortal.
So sorry to cut you off.
Absolutely.
Is what he's trying to conclude that the stories or what's being told is based off the collective of society, and the truth is only based off the collective of society?
Exactly. So he says next, he's saying that reality, or what people believe is their reality, is in a lot of ways determined and set by the party that they're affiliated with, or the party that's really running things. And he's getting quite political with it, but he says, how else can a party do that? Basically, what the party says is reality, and that's what reality is real.
Yeah.
And how else would a party do that unless it's language? Right?
Well, sorry to cut you off again,
Absolutely.
but it's kind of like the winners write the textbooks, right? They write
victors,
history.
yes.
The
They write the
victors
history
win
books.
and write history books.
Exactly.
Now a loser writes a history book.
And that's something that we're going to talk about later in this episode too, is that history written has its own biases, but we shouldn't go deep in that right now because we could go really deep.
Yeah.
Okay? But coming back to this, so what he's saying basically is that power is from those that control language, and those that control language control the way that we see the world. And that's incredibly relevant to bring up today because our topic is a specific government program, and we're going to be going deep into it. And it's relevant to say that, you know, that's also language that has been put out to the public. So take it with a grain of salt, but not only that, it's something that's very real. This week, we are not going at all in the realm of conspiracy. And some of the things are really quite shocking. So back to doublespeak, right? Because that's the point of this whole rant. Sorry, Elsa. He gives us 3 very real examples. The first example is Jimmy Carter, right? And Jimmy Carter's comments specifically on what was then the failed raid on the U.S. Embassy in Iran to free the hostages, right? He called it in an interview, he called that failed raid, he called it an incomplete success. It was a failure, okay? He said the success was not complete. It was a horrible show. Everybody know. Basically, it was after that nobody gave a shit about Carter after that, right?
Yeah.
And he was saying that it was not a calculated thing that he said. His knee jerk reaction was to use that vernacular in that order.
Uh-huh.
The next one is the nuclear weapons project when they're testing. This is pre-Cold War, post-World War. That project was known as Peacemaker. Okay, it was called Peacemaker. Now, during his speech talking about the program, I think it might have been Carter, I don't recall now, but he uses the word, peacekeeper, and it was a televised event, so since then it was known as Peacekeeper, but the words were designed, William Lutz argues, to make a nuclear weapon sound nice, okay? And this last example, this is what really drove it home for me, and Jordan Brown, this is what I was telling you that you're gonna like this one, okay? So, in Kansas City, around the same time, they're trying to, or the government, state government, they're trying to build a certain development, you know, in that city. Now, when they put on the paperwork for that, they called it a resource development park, okay? Sounds like a nice enough word. Ask me what a resource development park is.
So what is that?
It's a garbage dump. And that's what I mean is the power, right? It's a garbage dump. And these guys, these poor people of Kansas City, they wouldn't even have known until they asked.
Yeah.
Yeah, yo, what's a resource development park? And that again is going to be important later on when we talk about it. That's a great point where we can start talking about one of the first pieces of content that we watched, which is the 2021 release of Judas and the Black Messiah.
Yeah,
right?
Great movie.
Yeah, this is a movie that
Phenomenal.
we watched. It's about a number of things, but let's get into it. So let's talk about what do you guys think about the movie?
Judas and the Black Messiah is a dramatic retelling of the events surrounding the assassination of Fred Hampton. He was the charismatic leader of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panthers. And, you know, the various, you know, parties involved with, you know, a lot of events, surrounding it. But, you know, so the movie opens up inside an intelligence led briefing with the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover. He's going in, explaining to his men as to how their program is intended to stop the rise of the Black Messiah, who is Fred Hampton.
Absolutely, right. There's also a second protagonist or another main character, because as we know, it's about how, you know, the FBI was able to infiltrate these Black Panther Party.
Yeah.
And the main character or the other protagonist, his name is Bill O'Neill, who was an African-American car thief who agreed to be an FBI informant after being caught. Right, and then it continues to kind of show the chaos that ensues in this individual's soul, and they really break that down quite well, I think.
Yeah, and you know, like the one thing that you see a lot with, you said Bill O'Neill, right?
Yes.
Is that they use informants that, you know, often quite violent or emotionally disturbed individuals to present false testimonies or to frame the Cointelpro targets. And they also do a thing called snitch jacketing, you know, where they make the targets of the people that they're trying to put in jail or stuff like
Infiltrate.
that. Yeah, or infiltrate or ruin their persona in terms of their political following.
Yep.
They make them look like they are the police informant or the CIA agent, and so they will go in and instill that emotional feeling from their followers, and then their picture will be ruined. And we saw that in a flashback or in a moment from Bill O'Neill where he met another security officer, and that security officer says, "Oh yeah, I was killing. We poured boiling water over this snitch, and we threw him in the Hudson or whatever river or whatever it was."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in reality, that guy wasn't the snitch that they poured boiling water over. It was the guy that was pouring the boiling water on him who was the snitch.
Yeah.
And the only reason Bill O'Neill found that out was because the FBI guy that was talking to Bill O'Neill told him that.
Yeah.
So now he's questioning whether or not he's actually a snitch. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Because he doesn't know. Yeah, and it's really important, to understand that they're going after like people who they can get leverage on.
Yeah.
So these FBI and informants, as we said, this guy, he was a car thief, and it was either you go to jail for like 20 years or you work for us, right? And then in that sense, they're able to get them to work against their own people or their own cause.
When you're, we've never been in this situation, thank God, but when you're facing life for whatever reason, that's it's not an easy thing to go through or even like try to endure.
Yeah.
The movie does a lot of things. What I found was interesting in the movie was that the role that federal agents were playing in basically grooming this individual and many more, not only grooming but also like strategy meetings and guiding, and it was like it's so planned out.
Yeah. And they're acting like the FBI, like the people who worked in the FBI, not the informants, were the almost emotional support for these informants that were disturbed and didn't know what was right or left in terms of life and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it really shows how Bill O'Neill, he felt very conflicted on the inside, and the movie does a really good job of like showing, because he had this like turmoil inside where he was believing everything that Fred Hampton was saying and doing, and he felt right, but he knew that he was
puppet, right?
it was like a
Yeah,
checkmate
leverage,
already. And there's
Yeah.
that scene where he's in there at the rally, and he's standing there, and that FBI agent was like sitting there in the crowd, just looking at him, and he and
like they did a great job also of like portraying Fred Hampton, especially the actor who did as well. Like he was so charismatic, right? That to get that kind of portrayal in a movie can be a little bit difficult, but it's like I highly recommend we even would watch it again. Like you watch it and you learn new things from that movie. I mean, you can watch it. I guess we watch it on HBO Max.
Yes.
Yeah, so you guys can watch it.
It's out there on HBO Max.
So it's on HBO Max. But in the opening scene, he's giving a speech to students, and this is something that he said so long ago, and I think this is just so amazing. But it says he's literally teaching this. These are one of the things that he goes and he speaks to groups of people about, and he says, "War is politics with bloodshed, and politics is war without bloodshed." I don't know. I'll never forget.
Powerful
those
quote.
words.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
And the thing about this whole movie is that they portray Fred Hampton as this great guy who's fighting for his people and a messiah, right?
Yeah.
But then at the same time, they're making you question whether or not he is being a messiah, because the FBI agent is trying to convince Bill O'Neill, that that the Black Panthers are actually a violent militia that are trying to revolt against the government or trying to destroy our everyday livelihood. And then you kind of need to question on the FBI side, like their motives, are they in the right place? Because when you look at these Black Panthers and all of the guns that they had portrayed in at least the movie, is how dangerous are they? Are they really a good movement or a bad movement? And I think they did a great portrayal of that, because when you don't know whether or not one character is good or bad, or the other characters go to bad, and you really
Yeah.
need to question both sides' motives. It kind of gives you the whole concept of this whole podcast. It's not just black and white. You have two sides to each story.
Yes.
Both are fighting for the right
Yeah.
and like the liberty of their people.
Exactly. One of the things that really happened, and you can see right there the power of different groups combining or coming together. They were in the movie, Fred Hampton and his lieutenants, they go and see the head of another, let's say, organization, which was the Crowns.
Mm-hmm.
And they go and they have this meeting. Those guys were actually, they had a lot more people and they had a lot more guns.
Yes.
If you notice in the movie, that's when that's the first gun or big gun that those guys got, or like a rifle.
It was from
them.
Yeah.
And the leader of the Crowns, he pulls out a pamphlet. He said, "This was left in the morning. This was left in the morning in front of my house." And it literally, it's a pamphlet and it's words, and it says it's from the Black Panther Party.
Yeah.
And it's like these pamphlets that were passed out about of Fred Hampton saying the Crowns are bad and whatnot.
Yep.
And Fred Hampton looked at it, he's like, "I didn't write this." He said, "Who wrote it?" Who wrote it? He said, "The pigs." Meaning it was known then to them that, look at that, that's how you get in between groups.
Yeah.
They could have come together,
Yeah.
had actually a much stronger movement.
Yes.
And on every level they were trying to be
And
strong.
that's exactly what makes this movie so powerful, is because it really dives in and shows you how the FBI was able to infiltrate these groups and create division and smear campaigns. Because you have to understand what the Black Panther Party originally was about, right? It was about like protecting black people from police violence, like getting them out of the streets, getting them jobs, like educating them, having their own community, right? And the FBI was you have to, so as what like Corey said, they're trying to protect their way of life, right?
Yep.
This is back in like the 60s. America was a very divided place, right? And that's what made this Fred Hampton, aka the Black Messiah, so much of a threat, such a big threat, and why ultimately he had to be like eliminated, because he was bringing the community together. He also brought in the white community. Everybody was starting to like get behind this kid. So you can't forget, Fred Hampton was only 21 years old
when he was
when
executed.
the FBI ordered his assassination.
Execution style.
21 years old.
Yeah.
Again, it's a great movie. I think, whoever's listening, you guys go and find the movie and really watch through it attentively. It's a really good movie. But the movie, at the end of the day, is still a movie. And the literal depictions of specific events, they have to be taken with a grain of salt, because we can't just trust that this movie is going to tell us all the truth, right?
Yes.
It's still Hollywood, baby.
Yes.
However, the program that we wanted to talk about today is Cointelpro, okay? It is a legitimate program. You can also look it up. It's created by the FBI during J. Edgar Hoover's time. I mean, you guys can go to the FBI website, the U.S. National Archives. It's public. We are not in the realm of conspiracy, again. But I have a couple quotes right here from it, or describing it. It is basically created to infiltrate and discredit anti-war and civil rights organizations, including the stated goal of preventing a black messiah from uniting them all.
Yep.
And this was the verbiage that political leaders were using at that time. Political leaders at that time were white. Let's just say that.
And fun fact, it was just the 50th anniversary of when this whole Cointelpro was exposed to the public.
Yeah.
A couple days ago, it was just the 50th anniversary of it.
Yes.
Wow.
That was March 8th of 1971.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty crazy story, actually. Essentially, a group of anti-war activists. I'm sure they were probably white, I believe, but there's no detail as to who they were, or we didn't dive that deep. But they broke into a FBI office in Pennsylvania and stole every document that they could possibly find.
Yeah, these are white guys. Come
on. and they leaked it to the press, right? And the public found out as to what was going on in their America, and made everybody question everything that they had ever learned, or what they had seen on TV, or what they're being fed.
Yeah.
And I think it shaped how how our country is, today.
Yeah, so the program was actually formulated or finalized, let's say around 1956, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I wanted to give a little bit of the background, kind of what's going on during that time. I chose the years 1945 to 1955, 1956. And I'll talk about some global events because they're relevant as a post-war reconstruction industrialization era. So it's really relevant. But let's talk about it a little bit, right? So post-war, World War II, there's a boom in industrialization. So really the world is seeing a lot of new things happening, boosts in a lot of different areas, and then that gives people, or everyday people, the privilege to, focus on social change and things like this as well, which is a good thing. But February 1945, they had the Yalta Conference. That's FDR, Stalin, Churchill, meeting to decide when they fuck up Germany, how are they going to split it up, yeah? It's saying, how will Germany be divided, basically what they're doing. Then 1945, the U.S. atomic bomb is tested, so the world is a completely different place where now total annihilation of countries is on the table, is on the war table, right? It's an era also of anti-communism, right? Communism is the real big enemy. Countries and power brokers were all placing bets on which ideology will prevail. And everybody who's not a communist, they don't like communists, okay? Then in 1948, April, there was the Trizonia, which is again, France, Britain, USA, joined forces. It's like a new organization. Then this is the same organization that in 1948 established the Deutschmark, after the Reichsmark that Hitler had and his best friends. 1949, NATO is established, US, Canada, Belgium, France, etc. Post-war, baby boomers are beginning to emerge. Yeah, everybody fucking. Sorry. People moved out of the inner cities and into the suburbs. There's a suburban boom. Now that the war is over and African Americans who fought for the war, or fought for us, as always returned with experiences that, that they went through during the war. Completely different experiences if they had stayed and been oppressed in this country. Mm-hmm. Dave Chappelle has a joke. It's a funny joke. He's basically he says this. He's like, it's hard to come back after the war and sit on the back of the bus when you're in Europe getting pussy for frivolous things like candy bars and shit. Oh my god, it's so funny. Of course, because their entire mentality shifted, right? They had certain freedoms. They could be with white women. You know what I mean? The things really change when everything that you've ever known is different. Uh-huh. And not only that, let's not forget about the additive effects of literal war, okay? Who knows all the traumas and all the heroines and all that stuff.
Yes.
But now we're this is like the Reconstruction era, right? We're still in this time period now. I found this kind of quote really kind of, it kind of messed me up. This is from one of these NATO or government. I didn't get the exact source because I'm just trying to say that it's like a public thing and this is like a public department saying words like this. But at the time, local governments, the National Democratic Party, okay, all thwarted the upward mobility or forward progression of black Americans. Do I need to say that again? National Democratic Party openly got in the way of the upward mobility of African Americans. Never forget that the next time you choose Democrat, okay? Anybody who's listening. KKK also at this time secretly friggin' killing black people all over the place. There was like 6,400 people, 6,500 people total. I mean, that's just the ones that we know. Yeah. Okay. Because obviously there's so many you don't hear of. Jim Crow, these black codes, everything is really. This is in full effect during this time. It's kind of the end of it, but that shit really doesn't go away even till today, right? Like even in California, I think in 2018 I was reading about an African American male who was hung by a tree in California. So please, these things don't go away.
Yeah.
And also during this time, there's a huge rise of African Americans in certain prominent positions or positions of local authority. Never like full-scale authority, right? So they're becoming teachers and things like this, right? So the examples
centers of influence.
Yes, in local communities.
Yes.
Always remember.
Yeah.
So there's Ida B. Wells. I mean, she's a little bit more famous than some of the people I want to mention today. Obviously, we heard about Malcolm, Dr. King, all that. There's Charlotte Hawkins Brown. Okay, after this is in Mississippi, I want to say. After her school got its funding withdrawn, she started her own school called the Palmer Memorial Institute. So things like this, that's a huge shift if you're able to put the funding together at any point, for anybody to do this, and for school especially, because they were sending children to work still, so what is school? Then there's Isaiah Montgomery. I really like this story of this individual. He created an African American only town of Mound Bayou, Mississippi. Okay? And here's what's interesting, because the point is this. Remember, I'm talking about what happened to African Americans, but this episode is not about race. Andrew Carnegie, white guy, Andrew Carnegie, robber baron, he funded a library, a hospital, 3 cotton gins, a bank, and a sawmill for that African American only town.
Wow.
No, it's not just about race, remember. I wouldn't say the number of lynchings, but when I saw that number, I was appalled. Then in 1948, Truman ordered the integration of African Americans into the military. This is an official integration, which is also a freaking joke, because we had the Tuskegee Airmen in that same war. Yeah. Before that, all the way to the Civil War, they were fighting. Okay, they conscripted everybody, which I think Truman get out of here. Then 1954, Supreme Court. This is more, everybody knows about this one. Brown v. Board of Education, right? That's also changing things. Educational segregation is no longer a thing. What I'm trying to say here is this is an incredibly politically charged atmosphere around this time when this program was created. And education plays a huge role for the progress of African Americans during this time. Mm-hmm. At the time, these guys came back from war, and men were promised better jobs or certain things, and the African Americans were still not getting these opportunities. Whatever. Yeah. They were upset. There's a few. 1955, Rosa Parks. 1957, Little Rock 9. 1956, I skipped it, but 1956, Cointelpro is created. 1957, the Civil Rights Act, at least the first version, comes into effect, right? Which didn't really have an effect until maybe the 1964 Civil Rights Act, or even then, it's relative which state you're in. And it was created basically, at least 1957 was because literally black people were going to vote and they would get picked up and fucked up and left to die. So that was so that everybody could get the votes. Yeah. But again, the Democrats or whoever was really running, they were Republicans at the time were running, but they did that again for the votes. Okay, let's not get it twisted. It's not about race.
It's not about race. It's about power, right? Or the consolidation of power and preserving a way of life, right? And so we're gonna go into this whole counterintelligence program called Cointelpro. Its intended effects, and this is according to the document that you can find yourself. The intended effect of FBI's Cointelpro was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, or otherwise neutralize groups that the FBI officials deemed subversive. And subversive means a group who's essentially trying to supplant a way of life or a set a political or a lifestyle, right? And so I'll go down the list. Yep. So number 1 is to create a negative public image for targeted groups. For example, through surveilling acts, then releasing some negative personal information to the public. So they would do this by bugging your apartment or whatever, finding out that you're cheating on your wife or something, and put that out there, smear you, right? And then so number 2, break down internal organization by creating conflicts. This is what Corey said earlier. So you would have agents inside send anonymous letters to create tension within an organization, right? And also to create dissension between groups. For example, by spreading rumors that other groups were stealing money. This is also something that the movie portrays. Another one is to restrict access to public resources. For example, by pressuring non-profit organizations to cut off any type of material support. And another one is to restrict the ability to organize protests. For example, agents were promoting violence. So in the movie, the FBI informant, he essentially brought some C4 or dynamite, right? Mm-hmm. Trying to make the group more violent, trying to make them do something destructive.
Yeah. In the public's eye.
Yes, in the public's eye, right? Yeah. Oh, so now these guys are terrorists, right? Yeah. If they were to go through that.
And once you're, as we know with America, once you're either labeled a terrorist or you're a potential terrorist, you might as well be a terrorist. Yes. And they're going to shut it down. Yes. That's why we have the Patriot Act.
Yes. And then the last one was to restrict the ability of individuals to participate in group activities. For example, by character assassinations, false arrests, and surveillance.
Heavy.
It's real heavy, and you see all these things, and you really kind of question the realm of democracy that we live in. Do we live in a democracy, and what's the level of democracy that we actually live in? You know, democracy is supposed to be by the people, for the people, and everything like that. We're supposed to have all these freedoms, but by creating organizations that are like this, that watch over the civilizations and make sure that we don't go against the status quo, it begs the question: do you really live in a democracy, or by doing the things that these people are doing, are you striving or leaning towards communism, or like Russia, where it's technically a democracy, but at the same point there's only one power, and you can't fight against that power, because if you fight against that power, they will destroy you.
They're an oligarchy, right? They have like these people, 16 people at the top, who live like the Romanovs.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. I love Putin. I don't want to talk bad about Putin. Okay, don't.
You love him, huh?
I don't love him. I'm just saying I love him. Okay, I love him. Okay.
That's dangerous to say in America.
Dude, I don't love him. I just don't want to say anything bad about him. All right, because I'm more afraid of Putin than I am of Americans. All right, let me just say that. But you bring up a good point, because what does democracy imply? Democracy implies a centralized focus on what the people want, right? I have a book here, again, it's Noam Chomsky, it's one of the books that he wrote, it's called Media Control, The Spectacular Achievements of Propaganda. Funny title, but in here it's back to that perception, back to that reality, back to what is perception, back to what is reality, and what is that defined by, if not by the party. There's just a small sentence here, right? So, he says, pick the topic you like. The Middle East, international terrorism, Central America, whatever it is, the picture of the world that's presented to the public has only the remotest relation to reality. I mean, that's a heavy one.
That's a real heavy one, and I mean that ties back to what we've said before, that only the winners write the history books, and only the winners can tell you what reality is, and it even ties back in today's realm of the last administration, not to get too political, at least in this sphere, but if you tie last administrations in and you see the news media, they didn't want him to win, but he did end up winning. And then the next administration comes in and they paint a terrible picture of him, and like they're painting the entire last 4 years, and that's because he won, and now they're going to try and erase him from the history books, or just talk about how good they are compared to the administration before. And I just think that ties so much into today, as it's tied back into the 1950s.
Yeah.
So this leads me actually to next little less segment. So I kind of wanted to go over some of the groups that were known targets of this FBI operation. Obviously at the time it was the communist and socialist organizations, and obviously all the black nationalist groups, whether that be Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Black Panthers, all that.
Farrakhan.
Also, the white supremacist groups, including the Ku Klux Klan, and a broad range of organizations that were labeled called the New Left, and these were students for a democratic society. Also, any groups that were protesting the Vietnam War at the time, and most importantly, organizations and individuals associated with the women's rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wanted to, let's speculate on this, because so last week the current FBI director had testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, involving all the security failures of the January 6th insurrection.
Yeah.
And basically, I wanted to get into how the FBI knew that there were these threats, all these existing threats, but yet, as we most famously know, nothing was really done to deter these threats. So this made me thinking, okay, Cointelpro, we saw some of the public smearing by through the media. So did they let these groups infiltrate the Capitol building just so that way they could publicly smear them and most likely demonize Trump and his following, right? And as we know, after this, there was mass arrests. There was a lot of political will to allow this to happen. And, of course, all the bad press involved.
See, you know, what you've brought up right here is a very good point, because this is something straight out of Sun Tzu and the Art of War, which is, if you have two factions that are against you, if you have two enemies, okay, what you need to do is, one way or another, get those enemies to fight amongst each other. Okay, if you're a good tactician or a good general. And once there emerges a victor between those two enemies, then you come in after that enemy has depleted themselves from war, and you take them both out like that. That's when you have, and even this is
that's
like
the whole like divide and conquer.
That's
right?
exactly what Sun Tzu. That's where it's from. Divide and conquer. When you keep people warring beneath amongst themselves, you know, the Senate can.
And I actually still have your book. You know, by the way, Corey, The Art of War. I still have it.
It's a powerful book.
I need to return that to you. I've had it in my possession for like 3 years now.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's one of the most powerful books I've ever read in my entire life. It's made me realize the power that is behind strategy, and especially political influence, and how in depth people can go with political power, and the ability to play life like it is a game of chess.
Yeah, and how relatable those same moves are in every aspect of existence.
Exactly. And, you know, kind of tying back to what you're talking about, Jordan, is the concept that Cointelpro used, or the strategy that they used of neutralization. And in a book, you know, work with me here, by this book called Cointelpro, The Untold American Story by Paul Wolfe. He uses this great phrase about neutralization, and I'm going to read it right here. As explained on record by the FBI, it doesn't necessarily pertain to the apprehension of parties in the commission of crime, or the preparation of evidence against them, or securing of the judicial conviction, but rather to simply make them incapable of engaging in political activity by whatever means. Just like the insurrection, you know, in pure speculation, maybe they did just let them storm the Capitol, knowing that it was going to happen, so that they could use that whole scenario against the last administration. Like, oh, if you let this continue, this administration is going to cause more. There's going to be more of this, and so that they use this to cancel, like, essentially Trump or the last administration to give more power.
Once you label that group as fanatics, everyday people or voting people are going to be like, yep, they're fanatics.
Yeah.
Well, where I was like thinking is, did they label them subversive, right? Because those were the groups, because they're essentially trying to change the status quo. So
in a very technical definition, they are subversive, because they're against the status quo or against the norm that what we have accepted.
Exactly, and you know, in the previous time when Cointelpro is supposedly organized and was around, you know, we don't know if it's still around now, but while it was around, they actually used neutralization against King, or I should say that they tried to use it against King, but they tried to do...
You're talking about Dr. King?
Yes, Dr. Martin Luther King and everything like that. They tried to use the strategy against him, but they personally attacked him. They didn't go to the people, they went to him in a personal sense. And
well, I mean, an attack on him is an attack on all those
people,
because he's
their chosen he is them. He's the face.
He wasn't an elected official, but he was their chosen person.
But what I meant was that they actually went to him in person. They tried to use his sexuality and his love to, you know, be sexual with women and stuff like that against him. And supposedly they had these tapes where he was with women, and they wired back to the wiretap.
You know,
back to when, you know, we were talking about the wiretaps. They supposedly wiretapped his hotel room or his apartment or whatever, and he supposedly had these women over and had sex with them, and they had these tapes upon him. And they went to King himself and said, hey, we will release these tapes to the public and say how much of a womanizer you are, how much you sexualize and use prostitutes and stuff like that.
That was a smear campaign.
And, you know, they said in this book, like I said, by Paul Wolfe, they said this to King. They said, King, there's only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. You have just 34 days in which you can do this. and this number has been selected for a specific reason. It has a definitive practical significance. You are done. There is but one way out for you. You better take it before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is barred to the nation. And so they're essentially threatening him. And what happened was, King didn't back down. Said, hey, like, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And these FBI agents, they went to the press. They're like, hey, release this.
Yeah.
Release this information. But the caveat was, the press was like, no, we don't want to do this. We don't want to take... The journalists that they were going to were like, I don't want to take on this story.
They become subversive.
Yeah, but it kind of like what happened was that the FBI didn't realize how much power King had over people in general, and how
respect.
Emotionally, respect that they had for them.
See, like, I think what's a dead sentiment in our time is like, when somebody was standing up, and speaking for the people, all people, equality. Let's say going back to Jesus, Muhammad, those were characters that did this, right? Peace. People were drawn to them. We don't have this thing today. If somebody stands on the corner and starts speaking like this or speaking about revolution, we're going to call him a nut.
Yeah.
We're going to say, hospitalize this guy.
Exactly, yeah.
Same thing in that song I was telling you guys last week. He said, the earth was flat. If we went too far, you would fall off. Now the earth is round. If the shape changes again, everybody would start to laugh.
Yeah.
You're kind of stuck in these ways.
Yeah.
And those ways create that cycle of the same shit.
Yeah.
Again, what a heavy topic. What a heavy program. I think we brought up a lot of good points. But to transition and to continue a little bit, I want to double back on the notion, because we talked a lot about, African American oppression, so on and so forth, and American oppression. But I think what's relevant and what we need to say is that it's not necessarily about race, and it's not necessarily about control. It's about authoritative governments and the procedures that roll out from underneath them. So I wanted to, bring up a story that I didn't create this. I didn't create this story fully, but I watched it in a show. It's called Power, and I made my own things with it. But I'm gonna give you like what they said and do my own dramatic effects. But I'm gonna say all these things to show you that it's not about race, and then we'll talk about what this program that we just spoke about looks like in other countries and across.
On the global scale.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I call this story the councilman story. Okay. So I'll tell you guys about a city councilman, okay? Let's say he represents a lower income community. For example, let's say it's Queens, New York, all right? Let's also say that this councilman is black, which right now is irrelevant and only comes into play later, but even then will not matter. Now, in order for the community to get behind him with the votes, he needs to promise them a direct benefit or some sort of public good, right? Which he'll make that promise to them. Easy money, he's going to make a lot of promises in his political career. So let's say what he wants to do for the people is build a public children's recreation center for lower income children to go and do some recreational activities. Now, in order to get that public building developed, he'll need to use public taxpayer funding. Now, is the government going to pay for the entirety of the project? Absolutely not. Tax revenue allocations are budgeted pre-collection. So maybe he'll be able to get 30% of the funds for the project. The rest he'll have to raise on his own or with his team. Most likely, he's going to host an event and invite wealthy private citizens to raise funds. Most likely, these wealthy people are white in a state like New York, but again, it's irrelevant. But he'll have to make these guys the same or whatever promises they want, the same as he made to the bottom. Except the working man is used to being stepped on and will never come to collect on the promise, but the wealthy man will. And if the councilman wants to stay in power or maintain his power, he is going to abide by whatever they ask. Now, let's also say, and again, as I go deeper in the story, it's just a thing that I like put the dots together. It's just a thing that I put the dots together, but really what a heavy thing. So now let's say that this councilman also has ambitions to become the governor of this great state of New York. For anyone to control the policy of an entire state, they need to be accepted by majority of the people. We're a democracy. Majority of private citizens, both in the lower income constituents who put him in power in the first place, or put him in public office to begin with. But to make it to the highest state level of public office, he also has to make the promises to the wealthy private citizens in whatever galas, fundraising events, however. And when they come to collect, he will abide. And let's say that one of those elite parties says, hey, you know, this rec center that you're talking about is not that great of an idea after all. I want to build a commercial development here, and I think it'll equate to more tax revenue for your community. Well, Mr. Rich Man, I think that sounds like a phenomenal idea. Now, my thing is this. When he accepts the commercial development, he will neglect the same everyday constituents that put him there in the first place. And when he inevitably crosses that line and fucks over those people, then what does it matter that he's black? He fucked the people. He went to the dark side. Keep the story in mind for the next segment here, right? Because we're going to talk about what breaking dissent looks like in other countries. And the tactics are the same across the board, varying on degree of authoritative control. And I want to say once again that it is not about race.
So if it's not about race, then what is it about?
You know, in my opinion, it's about, as we've spoken about Chomsky so many times, it's about those that hold power and those that do not.
And you know, Ali, that actually is a perfect segue into, or just, you know, tie into the fact that it is about controlling power and controlling territories per se. Mm-hmm. And, you know, tying it back to Cointelpro, you know, even in Puerto Rico, there is the independent movement, or the movement that wanted to separate from the United States. But obviously that's very difficult with the United States being such a huge power. And then you have Puerto Rico, which is small, it doesn't have the strong military. But you had this leader, Mari Bras, who was, you know, the leader of this movement called the Independistas. And at a time, you know, during the end, he was stressing out, he had bad health, he was freaking out, and his son died. And then the notes that were left was that, or the information that was left of how he died was that he was killed by a man in a black sweater with a black jacket or whatever. He was shot in the head and stuff like that. And then there was a letter sent to Mari Bras. And this letter was so distressing to Mari Bras that he ended up having a quote-unquote heart attack. Wow. Because of his bad health, his bad emotional well-being and stuff like that. Supposedly he had a heart attack only because of that. And based off the FBI documents and the records, that it was actually because of the Cointelpro, or the speculation is that Cointelpro had a huge role in this destruction of the leader of the Independistas, or and stuff like that.
Wow. And
it ties back into your, you know, quote that it's not about freedom, it's about the ability to control freedom. Yeah. And by giving these countries or territories the ability to say, hey, you're under our wing now, you're able to be free, you're only allowed to be as free as we want you to be.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's a great point for you to bring up Puerto Rico, because it is the forgotten state. It's the one state that doesn't have a star on our flag.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, we know that after their last natural disaster, we don't really take care of them. Their infrastructure there is not supported.
Well, yeah, dude. Remember during this last time where they needed the most water, there was a landing strip, a plane landing strip, that was filled with bottles of water that never went to the aid places that were supposed to go. They just left and the water expired.
Yeah, but and we also questioned at the same time, like, oh, you know, they're in damage, they're in need. Okay, and then like the politicians were like, yeah, they're in need, but why should we send it to them?
Yeah, Trump was bashing them at the time. Remember, he was like, "Oh, they're a mess. They don't even take care of themselves." Yeah. But they're a state.
Yeah, they're a part of us. We're supposed to be protecting them.
I will say, I've been to Puerto Rico. Right, it's a beautiful place, and honestly, yeah, like it's now that I look back on it, it's kind of interesting that they are a state because it is not a English speaking island. It's all Spanish. Yeah, so
they were a Spanish colony. Right?
Yes. It's very different from what we have.
That's where first even Africans were brought the Caribbean, and that's where it spread.
Yeah,
that's where slavery is.
And tying even back into the independistas. Sorry, I'm having trouble saying this word.
Yeah.
But back to the book by Paul Wolf. He even quotes saying, lethal Cointelpro operations against the independistas continued well into the 1980s.
Wow.
But that contradicts the fact that that Cointelpro was supposed to end at 1971.
For sure.
And as Alfredo Lopez recounted in 1988, over the past 15 years, 170 attacks, beatings, shootings, and bombings of independence organizations and activists have been documented. Not just speculations, they've been documented. There have been countless attacks and beatings of people at rallies and pickets, to say nothing of the independistas walking the streets. The 1975 bombings of a rally at I'm going to butcher this, but Meaguas that killed 2 restaurant workers was more dramatic, but like the other 170 attacks, remained unsolved. Although many right-wing organizations claim credit to these attacks, not one person has been arrested or put on trial. And, like I said, this is all quoting Paul Wolf in his book, a clear instance of direct FBI involvement in anti-independistas violence is the Cerro Maravilla episode of July 25th, 1978. And we don't need to dive into that, but...
but that's what you're reminding me of right here. It's funny, it's even the same word. When I was living abroad and I went to Spain, I went to Barcelona, I went during the middle of their riots. They were independentista. I'm sorry, I messed that up.
Yeah.
They were people who wanted the independence. So Catalonia is that state there, right? Catalonia, it used to be the Catalonian Empire. Mm-hmm. It's not that same power anymore, okay? But I think that's important. Because you're trying to be an independent state when you're surrounded by Europe, okay? You're like a city that's trying to be an independent country in the middle of a European Union region.
That's like California.
They're gonna try to stop. They're gonna wreck you. The European Union, they'll just cut off trade. You won't make it.
Bro, they're gonna roll in the tanks. That's what's gonna happen.
Dude, what's funny you say roll.
That's what would happen to California if we try to break off.
It's funny you say roll in the tanks. People told us not to go. We were like, let's go. So we went. It was basically a revolution happening. We couldn't use some streets because they were locked down. I literally saw riot police, and I saw from afar people getting hosed.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's very.
Bro, you never told me that story.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch.
That out.
There's a bunch of stories. There's a bunch of stories I left out too. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it was quite an intense time. What's funny is we were going from a taxi from one place to another. And the guy was like, "Oh, I should be protesting now." He was independentista.
But he's trying to make that money.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And it all comes down to that mighty dollar. And I think this is a good point to kind of transition to other places that we see happening all across the world. The squashing of dissent, right?
Yeah.
We see in this little country. I brought it up in one of our past episodes. Is Myanmar. This is one of the biggest things that's happening in the world right now that's being ignored almost. It gets a little bit of press coverage, but not nearly as much as it should.
And it begs the question, sorry to cut you off, but it begs the question of why is it being cut off? Why isn't every single news article talking about this?
I'm so glad.
And why are the liberals not up in arms about it?
I'm so glad you guys brought this up. So check this out. So Myanmar, they're the coup leader or whatever, the head of the military, they just hired a press
agency?
A press agency or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're out saying now that the Democratic Party leaders they were trying to bring that country closer to China, right? And as you know, like we're against China, we're in Cold War, right? And he says that it's his intention to bring the country closer to the United States.
Yeah.
So what does this? So is this quiet because they want this military coup to like take place and for these guys to stay in power, so that way they can eventually come under more U.S. control? Or is this just a political tactic?
Again,
because we know the more military places, it seems like kind of a China route, right?
Again, this is how the U.S. interacts with the global community. What you just described is in our MO, in our modus operandi, is what we do, right? We, for instance, there's a country where we want relations. We try to do trade negotiations with them. They don't want to do that because they don't like the U.S. for whatever reason. So you instill a coup, and I'll tell you the country that I'm talking about when I tell you instill a coup. You put a leader in place who has sympathies towards our cause, okay, which just means they're going to give us oil or whatever it may be, whatever resource. We'll put that guy in place, we'll support him, we'll even arm him, and we'll even train him, okay? And after that guy inevitably goes nuts because he got all this power, starts killing his own people, we're like, oh, who saw this coming? At that point, you cut your losses. At that point, you cut your losses, you walk away. And the example, the country that I'm talking about right here is Iraq. Okay, Iraq. Sorry, I'm supposed to say it Iraq, right? Because I was say. But this is something that you see over and over.
Yeah, and I mean it makes sense because this is the military who's assumed all the control here, right? And maybe they are in the interest of the U.S.
Yeah, I mean this is pure speculation, also.
Yeah, all speculation, pure. So now we are in the realm of conspiracy, if you will, right?
But you also have to, it kind of ties back into what Ollie was saying before of how you have to create instability in these countries of interest to come in and say, hey, I'm the savior of this instability. I'm gonna create stability and make everything calm again. I'll provide you with resources or finances or whatever it is, and then we will be the saviors of everything like that. And that obviously speculation again. It begs the question of who's creating this instability, or is there instability? Was it self-instability, or was it created by a third party?
Or even deeper, is it still like somebody is creating this instability, or now our global systems are set up that it only creates instability?
This could be true.
It's deep as hell.
And that's because, kind of feeding off that point of just the person, like a person by themselves, they question everything. Everybody questions everything they hear. Oh, is it a conspiracy theory? Oh, is this actually real information? And I'm just being fed this. So now nobody knows what's true anymore because nothing is really true. And even when facts are actually presented to you, people there's always going to be that party that's like, I don't believe those facts because they were given by A, B, and C.
If the shape of the earth changes again, we're gonna laugh.
Yes, there you go.
Even if it was the truth.
And what's really shocking is because in Myanmar, So the group that got arrested and eradicated, this was a democratically elected president or whatever, and whole party, right? And the U.S. has largely remained silent, but this is a strategic place because we know that Myanmar is a Asian country. And
what do you mean by that?
So it is in that.
No, I know what you mean by Asian, but what's the relevance of it being an Asian country?
Because the U.S. could ultimately use this as a military installation, right? Or for
to get closer to China.
To get closer to China, to put more pressure on China. We see this happening all over.
Yeah, I didn't make the link, but that's a great point.
Yeah. So it could be a big grand scheme of things.
Yeah, because even we were fighting over the Pacific Islands back in World War II of who's going to have that territory, and if Japan were to have that territory, that would give them a huge power over the United States because then they could build military bases.
And check this out, now in Japan, we got 3 bases in Japan. Our whole Pacific fleet is in Japan because it's close.
But if anybody in the world has ever been checked, it's Japan. Okay. Because they have their own.
Not to laugh, but man,
they have their own massacres. They went into mainland China and ruined those people. Okay,
they could have eradicated China if we didn't stop them.
They were just as barbaric as the French before them and the Romans before them.
Yeah. They literally were gonna eliminate all of China. It was gonna be Japan.
Not to laugh at people's deaths.
There's this show, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David, right? So there was this episode there. There's this guy, there's Yoshi or something, and he said, "Oh, so how'd you come to this country?" "Oh yeah, my grandfather was a kamikaze pilot." He said, "Okay, if he was a kamikaze pilot, how are you alive here? What's going on?" He said, "No, he didn't crash into the plane. He grazed the plane." That's so funny.
I think I've actually seen that episode
back
too.
on topic.
But to bring it back on topic, that's kind of like, that's a good close on Myanmar, because what we should shift to is where else? What else have we seen even in this year or last year? Where is this happening around the world? And I want to take it to India, because this is something that's been happening even when we started this journey of this podcast, but this is something I think that is incredibly relevant, which is the Indian protests. And not only is it a media blackout globally, right? They've censored and shut down the internet, right? The point that I have to say about this, and you could call this speculation or whatnot, if you're a true patriotic Indian, I'm sure you're going to disagree with me, but it's okay. I was once you, so don't worry. Here's the thing that we know. India is the picture-perfect candidate for what corruption in government looks like. Please, feel free to disagree with me. But if you actually know how these guys function, I'm not discounting Pakistan either. I'm not discounting China either.
I feel like a lot of people don't even really know what happens in India. It's so quiet as to their like political structure and what happens there. Unless you really dive into it, you don't know.
So they're a parliamentary democratic republic, okay?
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Whatever that means, whatever that means. But they have a parliament, they have these decisions, but again, remember that parliaments are made of people who are flawed, people who have insecurities, and when insecurity mixes with power, it's troubling for people who they oppose. India functions like this, right? India will... literally, because there's villages, farms, and like underprivileged people all over the place, right? Half of the population. They'll basically go into that place. They want to develop something, corporate buildings, whatever. That's because they're a developing nation. They're gonna build it. Yeah. They're gonna kick those people out. They're gonna give them a bullshit check and say, because that's probably more money than that guy will make in his lifetime, he's gonna accept. And that's that. And next thing, they're literally homeless. They have nowhere to go. And then they, for instance, have to go to a gentrified urban city and they live in filth.
And they don't know how to live in that type of city because all they've known is this little area, this little farm or whatever.
But Indian politics works as if you oppose them, they'll mafia style fuck you up. Okay?
It's just like Russia and China, they like disappear.
And Pakistan. So I'll give you, okay. So there was this was in rural Pakistan in the north, okay? This was a few years back. And he was a political party leader. The opposing party bought the police of that region, finally, made deals with them, sent them to that guy's big giant palace or house, and they literally found in one room, I don't know, it's probably not a lot of stacks, but in one room they found $130 million. Dollars.
Wow.
In one room, sitting in the room.
Yeah.
Not
cash
hidden,
money.
Not hidden, just in the rooms, like here, there, everywhere.
Wow.
So, what I'm trying to say here is that it's really about power. The fact that other political party members send the police, I didn't get the main point. They actually shot that guy.
Okay.
They shot that guy, the other political party came into place. That's the main thing. They found all that money, killed them, took the money, took power. And that's really how it goes in these places. And by now, if they're literally... It's one thing to censor certain websites on the internet. To shut entire networks down, that's like China-level authoritarianism, man. Yeah. And they say, another thing, they're bringing back... So India has this like Hindu, like Orange Party is their shit. It's like Modi's party. These guys are... Notoriously, they killed a lot of Muslims. Now what's happening here again is like, this is getting like this nationalism political charge in India. And for instance, like, this is a real big problem that, Hindus don't eat cows. Muslims eat cows. So there'll be cows being transported from one place to, like, for Muslims to eat. Those guys will kill. Sometimes the driver of that car or truck, they'll kill him or beat him up, and they're like, "Oh, don't deliver because the cow is sacred because they will get slaughtered."
Yeah.
But that's not how you handle people who you disagree with. Okay?
Yeah.
You're literally picking them up. Nobody says anything about it.
Wow.
Nobody says anything about it. But if you look at the protests, right? This is the main Indian protests that we no longer hear about. They're about agricultural policy. They're about these farmers who make up the country getting wrecked by the hand of authority. And when they protest, when Hindus, Muslims, everybody is coming together, which is the first time in a long time that that's happened anywhere, let alone that place. We saw some stuff. That means I can't even imagine the things that we didn't see in terms of masses of people that gathered and in terms of what they did to stop that descent. Because we saw it. We saw some of it.
So what did they do to stop that descent? Because I haven't seen it. I've only heard. I've seen all these like pictures of these masses of people, all different cultures within India. All together, it was like hundreds of thousands of people, all like sitting outside the capital in Delhi.
They've done what they've always done. They've sent, and I'll describe to you what happens because this happens here everywhere. They send police with riot gear, helmets, sticks, shields, equipment, hoses, tanks if necessary. They'll send them and they'll quite literally, physically break dissent.
Yeah, so this brings me back, when you were talking about the Hindus that are picking up all the Muslims, and it seems like a common trend, right? There seems to be a war on Islam all around the world, right? I mean, we see it there in India. We also see it in China. Here in the U.S. at one point, Islam was like demonized. And I want to ask you this question: why isn't the Muslim world, these Muslim countries, up in arms about this? Why aren't they trying to protect their people and their faith?
I'll tell you one thing, okay? 60% of the Muslim countries, they're not doing so hot in themselves, okay? So they can't do something. The audacity for them to do foreign relation work when they're bombarded on the inside is not there. They can't do anything.
They have their own human rights issues, right?
And the second is, let's say certain Middle Eastern governments are a little bit more authoritative. So it could easily be seen that their own criminals or people that don't, align with their ideology, they're going to do the same things to them most probably. So let's just say that.
But, so what about China? Because
you bring
they
up
have these
point.
modern day concentration camps it's quite alarming. And you know what? It's not just the Muslim world. It's the whole world that's been totally silent on the issue.
There was an interview about an ambassador, either the ambassador from China to either Australia or Canada, one of these places. And this was when the video first surfaced of the Uyghurs in lines outside the train being put onto the train.
It's just like World War II.
So the
were we
guy,
back in 1942 or something?
The interviewer asked the ambassador, "Here, look, you're doing this to these people. We're seeing them right here." The guy sees
We're literally watching you.
The ambassador sees it. Nope, it's a made-up video. He's a goddamn representative, okay? He's a freaking ambassador. He's denying what I myself can see right there. I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely fucking absurd. Then let's not even talk about the Muslim world, that the rest of the world has not said anything.
Whole world.
Who cares what religion they are? It is people in concentration camps in 2021.
And don't get me wrong, I completely agree with you, and I think that what they're doing is wrong. It 100% is wrong. But then you have to, the question is still there that it is China. That's like saying if Russia was killing or committing genocide against another race or ethnicity or religion or whatever, that America can't just go after them. Then you'll have another Cold War or you'll have a nuclear war. We can't just go after China and be hey, you're killing all these Muslims and we don't agree with it. They'll be like, okay, well, what are you going to do about it?
But that's the whole point. We have NATO and the UN to regulate such
I completely
shit.
agree. And that, yes, we have all those
Geneva
organizations, and I think that those organizations should definitely take care of it. And I think that that causes other problem. But then on the other end of things, of why maybe America isn't so active towards fixing that problem is that after 9/11, we criminalized Muslims, Islam. Any person who came from that is that we criticized them and criminalized them in a way, cut them out from society, and even a couple years ago, we said, no, you can't even come to our country anymore. If you fly from this country, you can't come. No, like you're out.
Yeah, but that was a joke because none of the bombings.
Yes, but the
were from the Muslim countries.
Yeah, yes, but the point that I'm trying to make is that now if we, flip the coin and say, oh no, we actually support the Muslims and Islam and stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's almost like we're supporting everything that we criminalized for the past 10 years or since 9/11. And I'm not saying that all Muslims are extremists or anything like what was caused in 9/11, but it's kind of, we're giving a controversy towards what we strived for the past 19 years.
Yeah, I don't think. Come on, the United States is not going to say anything. Obviously, they're loving it. I mean, this is, at least in North America, it's kind of like a weird thing, right? When I was studying abroad, I knew this guy who was from Canada. And he was telling me blah 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 that he likes Trump. Okay, the guy has no reason to like Trump. Okay, our policy at that time, we didn't even have USMCA, did not affect him. Okay, in fact, we wanted to get into their markets and ruin their milk. You know what I mean? Like, he only liked Trump for the racism. Okay, and there is like an elite individual, somebody, his dad is somebody, whatever. The fact is that there exists, white guy, but regardless, that exists. And in a place like Canada where Muslims are accepted more or less.
I think America will intervene when it is in their interest to, or when they have an excuse to. So we look back to like Nazi Germany, right? Nobody stopped them from harming the Jews up until it was wartime and we were there and
the Depression happened and we needed money.
Yeah.
No, but we were quote unquote publicly, we were coerced or provoked into entering after he invaded Poland.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like an appeasement. But this is getting totally off track.
Yeah.
Because this segment isn't on foreign policy, right?
Yeah.
This
or speculation
is on Cointelpro and what's happening here in America and all around the world in terms of squashing dissent, right?
Yeah.
And I think America, there still is this beautiful light at the end of the tunnel, because at the end of the day, we can come on here, do this podcast, and bring up these old programs which might have shaped America, right? And they're also, we have the liberty to know about it, talk about it, express it, and improve on it, right?
Yeah, but improve on it is relative. What the fuck are we gonna do about it?
I mean, we're just here having this conversation, and all we can do is let's share our opinions.
And I agree with you. And when we're tying it back to Cointelpro, whether it be one person or 100 people, I think one of the greatest phrases of the past two decades comes from a kids movie, A Bug's Life. I don't know if you guys remember watching Bug's Life.
I totally remember. Yeah.
But there's a time when the whole movie's based off, the grasshoppers control the ants. The ants take all the food and give the food to the grasshoppers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But how I kind of correlate Cointelpro to forced labor. How I correlate Cointelpro to reality is that you have Hopper, who says this famous quote, "You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Wow. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1.
Wow.
And if they ever figure out that, then there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay?"
That is the heaviest thing, and look at the implications.
Dude, we should just end on that right there.
I mean, because
that sums up the whole.
Yeah, because I'll say one thing about that, and we should close. You're right. It's what he just described is one of the things that we want to talk about, which is who are the players who benefit from tyranny, right? And in this example, it's one group, and it even says a small percentage group.
Yeah.
That when you are having these systems and processes and procedures to keep these ants busy, they're gonna go about doing that, and then that leaves us to do whatever it is that we want.
Exactly.
Crazy.
Amazing.
I mean, wow, dude. I mean, that sums up every single thing that we've talked about today, and what a coincidence that it's just a cartoon children's movie from the early 2000s, and it has such a deep subliminal message in there that even from when you're very young, you're taught that there's a hierarchy, and there's some people that are on top, and then there's some people that work in the fields.
And it's up to the people to make a change.
Yeah,
and
look at that.
All they have to do is find out, get that little bit of knowledge.
Yeah, I think tonight, some of the things that we talked about, I'm gonna do the line, which is some of the things that we talked about today. There's clearly an understanding that it's not just black and white when you're talking about some things, right? Mm-hmm. But especially when you're looking around the globe, and then you're seeing so many of the same things happening. There's still another side to that. I'm not saying empathize with those people. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, there's just a way how things work. We're not here to change anything. We're certainly not revolutionaries. We're just here to have the conversations that maybe people are afraid to have. And I think tonight is a great example of that. Obviously, I want to thank you both for getting together today. I think it was a great conversation that we had. I want to thank you all for tuning in and staying with us for all this time. And yeah, tune in next week. We're going to do something exciting again. And as always, my name is Ali Laik, and I'm here with Jordan Brown and Corey Bearclaw. Have a phenomenal rest of your night.
Peace.
Good night.